Welcome into another episode of Southland Shenanigans. I'm Josh Criswell, and I'm joined by my co-host David Barry and a special guest. And boy, do we have a lot to talk to you guys about today. David, why don't you take it away for us?
Yeah, I mean, like you said, a lot to talk about. So let's dig in. Very meaty show. Today with us we have Beaumont Enterprise reporter extraordinaire, Lamar beat reporter Matt Faye. Matt, how you doing?
Good. Thanks for having me on the show, guys. Like you guys said, a lot to talk about. There's never seems to be a boring day in the Southland Conference. So I'm excited to get after it with y'all.
Yeah, seemed like we had a little bit of a quiet week, and then Tuesday rolled around, got a little bit of APR news. Already knew that McNeese wasn't going to be headed to the postseason for football, but baseball, football, and men's basketball for Stephen F. Austin receive APR-related postseason bans. But right after that happened, wasn't really much out from the university. Kind of made me think, and I think I even texted David this, felt like there was a little bit more to come out. And then sure enough, on Wednesday, the news broke that the NCAA had hit SFA with a handful of level one violations, concerning what ultimately amounted to 82 student athletes competing while ineligible over a 6-year span starting in 2013. Among the penalties, in addition to the suspensions, I think most notable, of course, is going to be the men's basketball, 3 championships, and that NCAA tournament win wiped away. Guys, I guess let's start with you, Matt. What was your initial thoughts whenever you saw this news break yesterday?
Yeah, sure. Well, initially when I started going through it, I was like, okay, well, let's see, what this all entails. And the more I kind of researched and read and looked into this, the more it just seems like a worst case scenario for SFA. You got your 3 top sports hit with these types of penalties. Not to mention, really I think on Twitter I called SFA basketball the darling of the Southland Conference. I think that's kind of how they're seen, conference wide, and other coaches or athletic directors may not like that, but I think that's their reputation. And especially with all the momentum they had last year, with the Duke win and, winning the conference. And then you look at the football team who, had a pretty strong season, relatively speaking, last year, compared to what, some people might have thought that they were going to do, a total rebuild last year. They end up having a couple good wins, but it really does seem pretty devastating for them. It's just a tough situation for sure.
It's funny when almost right before this news was released, I remember the Stephen F. Austin basketball Twitter account posted something about some social media video type of thing about beating Duke. Obviously big win for the program, and they're gonna promote it. But it was just it's kind of funny in retrospect, knowing that not too long later, the NCAA came down and dropped the hammer, not just on basketball, but really, I mean, on your what you call the big 3, programs, where you have, football is your big sport for the fall, basketball is your big sport for the winter, baseball is your big sport for the spring, and now you don't have even the chance at postseason play for any of them. It's a lot. I was reading, it's all about perspective. When I was reading the SFA release, it seemed a little more heroic. They found out what was happening and they got rid of it as soon as possible. But then, like, when you read kind of maybe more neutral releases, it's kind of like, yeah, you guys messed up. Not necessarily to say I would absolve Kobe Carthel, the head football coach, of anything. Right. He just got there last year,
and Ryan Ivey too. I think one of the things that the NCAA, that in their negotiated resolution, that was the reason why SFA didn't get hammered worse than they got hammered. And that was, one of the things they said is the NCAA kind of commended the way that the current leadership over there, I guess, kind of took action once they found out. But like you said, it was kind of the release, and then also the posting, I think, a quote on social media about like here's this quote from the NCAA resolution praising us in this 13-page document about us breaking NCAA laws over a 6-year period.
Yeah, and then when you see how the Dallas Morning News is doing story, they're interviewing at least one of the employees that was there at the time, and that employee's like, whoa, hey, Wolo, I wasn't expecting, you're putting this all on me. It kind of seems like this will always be a case of, one side versus another as far as who deserves the most blame. But ultimately, SFA, the current players, you hate it for the current players that are there, especially the ones that had nothing to do with it, which I would presume to be a lot of them. You're a baseball, football, basketball player, and all of a sudden it's like, well, you can't go to the postseason for at least 1 year, maybe more. It sucks for them. It sucks for Carthel to me. He got in and he's probably thinking like, hey, maybe postseason within 3 years, and now you don't know. So it's unfair for them, but it's one of those things where you got to pay the piper if you're going to make even if it's administrative mistakes, you got to pay the piper sometime.
Yeah, and I'm glad that you mentioned Carthel because, I don't think we're looking at, with APR, there's always the possibility of multiple years of being left out of the postseason. But, as we saw, they really did a good job in that first year boosting that football GPA. So I think that's, you look at sports that are going to be able to bounce back and get in the postseason after this upcoming season. I think they're going to be right there. But you mentioned that administrative error, and that kind of brings me up to the other thing that I wanted to talk about. As you mentioned, in SFA's, version of the events, and they kind of kept referencing this administrative error, which in what it boils down to, essentially, they were counting all credits towards APR submissions as opposed to degree-related credits, essentially, or credits toward degree progress. So I guess my question for both of you guys is, do you buy that this is something as simple as an administrative error, or do you think this is something where you look at it and it seems for an administrative error to selectively impact the three most, whether people want to admit it or not, in the fans' minds, three most important sports at the school? It seems a little bit selective for an administrative error, in my opinion. But what do you guys think?
Well, I'm torn because in one sense, obviously SFA is going to try to spin this and put blame on this, person who are no longer with the program, right, or with the athletic department. But in another way, it almost makes sense that it would be some type of that error for two reasons. One, because the scores were so low, right? I mean, it's almost like you gotta have the athletes can't be doing that bad, right?
But what if they weren't taking classes that go towards their degree, like we've seen kind of at other places in the past?
Sure. And then, but a second reason I think that is because it hits, it has such a wide impact on the program. It's not just one team or a couple of players. It's, those three major programs. So, could it have been one or two people who were screwing up and were with those three teams, assigned to those three teams? I could see that. I just don't. I think SFA is definitely trying to, shift blame to this anonymous person or people because that's a very convenient thing to do, right? But for those two reasons, I could see why that might make sense a little bit. David, what do you think?
As with a lot of things, I hate to do this and kind of sit on the fence, but I'm going to say it kind of falls somewhere in the middle. Like, were there administrative errors? I'm sure there were, but it also seems like on the other end that there were some like misdealings.
Well, and one big thing too is something that was found out in the resolution is the NCAA warned SFA about degree progress problems back in 2014, and it didn't get corrected until 2019.
So that tells me that it's not just an administrative error or errors. It tells me that there are multiple, like if you have to get told once and you still kind of, and you don't really act on it, that tells me like, yeah, it's kind of a little more than just a one-off thing. Like, oh, we just kind of messed up. Just looking at the numbers of the APR, like, the 810 for the basketball, like that's so low that there has to be. I would hope that there's an administrative error, because if otherwise, you're basically just not graduating kids. Like that's literally, you are kicking kids out. They're not even going to another school and graduating. There's just no accountability. So I'm gonna lean to the side of, like I said, I'm gonna sit on the fence here and say it's partially on an administrative error, but some of it can't just be that. Like it just can't.
Yeah, both of you guys mentioned the football program earlier. I think regardless of the situation, I think if anything, this might make SFA football a team that you got to watch out for this next year in the Southland. I think they're going to be going out there, and I think they're going to be playing, knowing, something we'll probably see with McNeese, knowing they're not going to be playing in the playoffs. They're going to be going and looking to spoil somebody else's party.
Definitely. David, I'm curious, he mentioned McNeese not having a similar penalty in football. How would you compare the way that McNeese handled the, I guess, releasing of this or announcement or whatever you want to call it to the way that SFA did? Obviously, McNeese is a little smaller in scope, but as somebody who covered that with McNeese, how did you think the two schools handled that?
I'm glad you asked that, because I want to say it was yesterday. A UTSA like beat writer came out and put out there that, oh, McNeese is they're a postseason ban that they've got for 2020, and Frank Wilson came from UTSA. Sorry, first year McNeese coach. He said something in his introductory press conference that kind of rubbed UTSA fans the wrong way. And when he basically just said, like, one of the things he likes more about McNeese is that, there's more tradition, facilities, different types of things. So a lot of UTSA fans took that, like I said, rubbed them the wrong way. So when they saw that McNeese was ineligible, some of them were able to kind of get a little celebration in. The problem is McNeese, they took a good strategy in my eyes, is they got ahead of it, way ahead of it. I mean, you're talking 6 months. They announced it in December before they even had hired Frank Wilson. So it was to the point where it's like, man, you can't really, we already know. Every McNeese fan is like, oh yeah, we already know. Like, you can laugh. You're right. But they got out ahead of it. A lot of these programs know this stuff months in advance. Like SFA maybe didn't announce it because they were trying to fight it. I wouldn't, put it past, and I guess I wouldn't blame them trying to fight it, knowing how heavy the sanctions were. But yeah, McNeese just said, all right, we messed up. We're going to get out ahead of it. We're going to announce it months in advance so that when the APR thing came out Tuesday, it wasn't a surprise. So I think that's the biggest difference, is that McNeese decided, look, this is about as bad as it can get for us. It's one thing. We're just going to get out ahead, let everybody know. So when the time comes and everybody's looking, you can laugh and everything, but we already knew it doesn't hurt us anymore. We're on to the season, as opposed to SFA now. I feel like they're going to have to deal with a lot from a player transfer perspective, possibly recruiting could hurt, but yeah, so I do give McNeese credit for getting in front of that.
Yeah. And one more thing, Josh, I think I was a little confused with why, and maybe you guys could provide some perspective on this, why SFA would delay the basketball postseason ban to 2021.
Yeah. So what I've heard on that is that it's because of the way that because obviously because of the coronavirus, they gave spring athletes that extra year of eligibility, but that didn't apply to basketball. So from what I can gather, a big part of the reason why they delayed that postseason ban for a year is so that kids, in SFA's basketball programs basically didn't get 2 postseasons taken away from them for something that, in a lot of cases they didn't play a part in, because these academic issues ended in 2019 at the end of that year. Sure.
That makes sense. I get that.
But yeah, the thing that I wanted to say about the way McNeese handled theirs, though, is I really like the way that they got out ahead of it. I think it allowed them to move past it quicker. But I also liked that they got out of it early in December, so that they were being completely transparent for their incoming recruits. Like, you got out ahead of it, and 2 months before National Signing Day in February, you had already put it out there that this was coming. So I think that was good. I would hope that SFA at least informed its recruits, because, they've known that these issues have been going on since, I believe, as late as like summer 2019. But I also think part of it could be is because of the negotiated resolution with the NCAA. I think it's possible that they could have had their hands tied, where maybe because this came out the day after the APR suspension announcements, maybe this was part of their resolution with the NCAA, that they had to release at a certain time. Maybe they were still working on it. But yeah, complicated situation to say the least. But, moving forward, some other big Southland Conference news came out, I guess yesterday evening, right as we were all kind of wrapping up on the SFA story. And that was the Southland Conference announced that it's going to be changing things up for conference championships for 5 of its sports. Matt, you reported the story in depth yesterday. Why don't you take it away?
Yeah, sure. So, 5 sports, let's see, baseball, softball, volleyball, soccer, and tennis, all going to be have some restructuring going on with those conference tournaments. Top 4 teams, it's just going to be top 4 that make that postseason championship. I think one of the bigger things is that the number 1 seed is going to get, to host the tournament. So, I think it makes, obviously right off the bat, it makes it harder to make the tournament. But then it puts an increased emphasis on, being that top seed, which I'm not sure that necessarily there was before, especially in the double elimination, formats with baseball and softball. But, you look at a school like Lamar, the only of those 5 sports, the only teams from Lamar that would have made a conference tournament would be their soccer team, and their women's soccer team, is a very good program and would have actually hosted the event under that format. But, right off the bat, just initial reactions to it is it obviously makes it much more difficult for some of those middle of the road teams to make the conference tournament. And then it puts an increased emphasis on that number 1 seed as well.
Well, and interesting note too, baseball is one of the sports where it's going to be cut down to those top 4 teams. And correct me if I'm mistaken, but David, McNeese, went on that run and won the conference tournament last year. They wouldn't have even been one of those top 4 teams that got in, huh?
No, they were the 5th seed. And then, that was actually going to bring up a point that I was going to bring up, is that regular season games are already important, but I think that's going to put an even added emphasis on it, because whereas, if you're in baseball or softball, hey, man, we lost 1 out of 3. We still have a pretty good record. Or, we took 2 out of 3, but we lost on a walk-off in the bottom of the 9th of game 3. So we took 2 out of 3 instead of sweeping. Well, all of a sudden, if you end up losing a game and you miss out on the 4th seed by a game, and that's the difference between you making the conference tournament and not. So I think there's going to be added emphasis, increased importance on those games. I think you might see, as far as specifically baseball, I think you might see like, all right, well, we may have to adjust our pitching staffs. Like those midweek games usually aren't quite as important for obvious reasons. It's not conference. But I think you might see even less attention focused on those midweek games, because obviously, more than likely, the Southland Conference is going to be a 1-bid league for, most sports. But if you're a sport like softball or baseball, it's like, all right, we've got to go hard every weekend. We cannot afford to drop a game like maybe we could have before, where it's like, all right, we're going to be in the top 8. Now, top 4 going to really make things is going to amp things up from basically game 1.
Right. And, Matt, one thing I wanted to get your thoughts on, obviously probably the biggest reason this happened was because of the financial restrictions that have been created by the coronavirus. We've seen this kind of across the country where schools from leagues that are bigger than the Southland have been forced to cut sports and things like that. Do you see this as, something to praise the Southland for as far as working towards these kind of solutions where I think as of right now, there hasn't been a Southland team that's been cut yet.
No. And specifically, I can speak for Lamar's athletic department when, they have been fairly adamant about saying we're not planning to cut anything. That's really not on the table for us right now, and we're going to find alternative ways to cut these costs, whatever they have to be, besides cutting programs. I think that should be really the formula that any athletic department is trying to work with. As far as applauding the Southland Conference, sure. I think this is not an ideal scenario, cutting the conference tournaments like this, but there are a lot worse things that could have happened, right? So they're going to have to get creative. And I think, if you read that statement from Tom Burnett yesterday, the commissioner of the Southland Conference, I think I applaud him for saying, well, basically, look, we got to cut costs, and this is one way that we're going to do it. Not try to sugarcoat it or anything like that. So in that way, sure, yeah, you could applaud the Southland Conference, but I don't think they did anything, that other conferences aren't necessarily looking at doing.
I don't want to take all the credit, right? But
you don't? You
No.
don't want to take credit?
I don't want to take it, but I will say I did write a column last week wondering when the Southland Conference would just take some type of action, right? Because I understand you can't make a lot of definitive changes, but a week later, and they actually have made some definitive changes, at least for one academic year. So, I mean, these things I think were inevitable. I think you will see more as far as maybe not an initiative from the conference, but I think you'll see stuff like I'll use McNeese for an example. McNeese would normally, even if it's a game 2 hours away up in Natchitoches against Northwestern State, football team will drive up there, get a hotel in the area the night before the game. Even Lamar, I think they might drive over the night before. So that's an hour away. I think at least for a year, maybe going forward permanently, you're gonna see those shorter trips where it's just kind of like a high school game. Hey, we're gonna drive in the day of. We might drive in early and just kind of get to the stadium, whatever. But I think you're gonna see things like that. Whereas, the basketball team I remember drove to Houston the night before, stayed at a hotel near Houston Baptist before going to the game. I think you might see more of that. Like I said, kind of that high school mentality of, hey, we've got to just drive over the day of, and hey, get there early, stretch, make sure you're nice and loose. So, but yeah, like I said, not gonna take all the credit. May take
just some of the credit.
Yeah.
So, David, to that point, I think you're 100% right. For example, when Lamar played McNeese last year in Lake Charles basketball, Tick Price took the team down there and they stayed a night and they practiced in the gym the night before, to get the feel of the rims, how it looked, blah, blah, blah. That's not going to be happening next year. Athletic directors are going to have to find little things to chip away and chip away and chip away, because if they do these big drastic things like cut programs, those are ways that you maybe not lose fans, but you lose the favor of fans, and you lose culture and things like that. So they're going to have to, like I said before, get creative with that little stuff. And I think you're right. You're right on it, David, with what you brought up there.
Well, one thing I think, too, that might be a silver lining out of all of this is I think we're going to have some really cool conference tournament moments, more so than we'd see, maybe down in Katy or wherever we may be, just because you're going to have full fan bases out at the arenas, which is something that, unfortunately, because a lot of teams are traveling long distances, you don't necessarily see. So I think that's going to be something that's going to be unique, at least for this next year. I'm kind of looking forward to the opportunity to see what some of these postseason Southland, postseason environments can be like, because that's how they used to do it. They used to do that. And I remember, I think it was back in 2003, Sam Houston State actually clinched its trip to the NCAA tournament on its home court.
Yeah, I like that because, obviously, Matt, we went in and covered we were all there for the, I forget, Matt, you weren't there because they told you guys not to go early. But no, but when we went
oh yeah, I was not in Katy for that one.
When we went to the Southland Conference tournament, like there's no atmosphere, right? Because think about it, there's no Southland Conference team in Katy. It's not like even the offices are in Katy. The closest school to Katy is Houston Baptist, with easily the least atmosphere or the least fan base. So imagine if you have, if somehow McNeese gets the top seed and you've got maybe like Sam Houston and Lamar and, another school, and you're going to all be at the HHP arena, like that to me, it's more intimate, but also like, you're gonna have to get there, because it's not gonna be like, we've got 15,000 seats. Instead, it's gonna be like, we've got 4,200, and it's gonna be a lot of McNeese, and it's gonna be whoever else can get in. So I think that will definitely create a better atmosphere. And you never know, this could be something, while it is a temporary change, it could wind up, if they like the results of it, could be permanent.
Well, Josh, do you think that's going to end up happening? Because they haven't made a decision on that basketball event yet. Is that what you foresee happening with that? Is the number one seed same like every the 5 sports that they announced yesterday?
I think it's something that it's definitely a good possibility, especially I think for these next few years. You're going to see universities and conferences, I think, that are going to try to be not necessarily back on their feet, but I think they're going to have to kind of take every opportunity to cut a cost, because I'm sure that, by just having teams at a host site that's already on one of your campus schools, I'm sure it's a lot easier than having, everyone drive in to a place where no one calls home. I'm sure you can get some deals, maybe getting teams put up in hotels. It just seems like from a cost and just kind of the feasibility for it for, at least the time being, we're probably not going to have as many big money buyout games for sports like basketball and football, especially if, fans aren't in the stands at 100%. So I think, at least for the foreseeable future, till things get back rolling, I think you're going to see a shift toward maybe this being the new normal for the next couple years.
And by the way, this is just a quick thing I want to say. This week we'd be in Corpus Christi for the Southland Conference baseball tournament, and I'm very sad that we're not there because I was looking forward to it.
Definitely disappointing, but we did get some good news this week, and NCAA is going to be letting athletes back on campuses in June, it sounds like, in some situations. So, for you guys, what was y'all's initial reaction whenever you saw that? It kind of feels like it seems like it's going to be a reality that this 2020 football season is going to happen.
It was one of those things where it's like, you don't want to get too excited, but you're like, it's
anything at this point.
Because here's the thing: June 1st, from June 1st to the first weekend of the season, which is August 29th, week 0. That's basically 3 months, and a lot of coaches have been asked how much time they think they'll need to prepare their teams, and a lot of them have, like, on the shorter side, I've heard 4 weeks. On the longer side, I've heard 6 to 8 weeks. Obviously, this June 1st is just voluntary workouts. Obviously, a lot of kids will probably be there because they don't want, it's voluntary in air quotes, because, if you're not there, you're not going to be getting in shape, and a lot of coaches will use that against you trying to determine playing time. So I think I think that it'll be about a month, 4 to 6 weeks starting June 1st, where it's going to be strength and conditioning, a lot of running and everything to kind of get your wind back up, because a lot of kids have gone 2 months without like really heavy, they've probably been running, but it's nothing like actual workouts at the school. So I think you've got about 4 to 6 weeks of that. And then depending on what the NCAA rules, I think after that, you're going to go into like a mini camp, training camp style thing. And yeah, I mean, I don't want to get excited. It's kind of like Charlie Brown running up to kick the football. I don't want it to get pulled away from me, but I'm kind of allowing myself to get to feel that way.
How about you, Matt?
Yeah. It seems like the first step, doesn't it? That's what I've keep hearing. Same thing.
And
with
then
the
on the high
school
side too. I mean, we're seeing it. June 8th. It looks like UIL is going to be letting teams get back for strength and conditioning. So it's kind of working towards that trend of getting back.
Yeah, no doubt. And for teams like Lamar and McNeese, these new coaches haven't been able to work with the players at all. So they were already behind because you're trying to figure out a new team, a new place that you live, a new program, and now you miss spring and you're doing all this stuff virtually. So I'm sure that when Blaine Morgan and Wilson, when they heard this, they were thrilled, I'm sure, because it's finally a chance, although it's voluntary, it's finally a chance to get some guys on the field and see what you have a little bit. So for those two programs, I think it's even more important, but obviously every team is in the same situation here, just happy to get back eventually.
Yeah, and looking ahead to the 2020 season, I guess kind of our last thing for the fans out there today is we're going to look ahead and see which Southland Conference teams. We're a few months removed from it. These are our way too early predictions, but who do you guys have going to the FCS playoffs from the Southland Conference? I'll start it off. I'm going to go with Sam Houston State just because of the defense. They bring back almost everyone, from a group that ranked in the top 8 in the country, and I think like 10 or 12 categories. They got a ton of pieces on offense, brought in a really talented wide receiver, Jaquez Izard, a transfer from Howard, who was a first-team All-American back in 2018, and a 2-time first-team All-MEAC player. Eric Schmid coming back at quarterback, some talented running backs back there. So I think they're going to be my favorite heading into the season. And I think probably the biggest reason why they're kind of separated in that, them and I think Central Arkansas a little bit too. I think their kind of consistency and the fact that they have some key pieces back, especially under center, and just a lot of playmakers out there to work with. So Sam Houston State's going to be my first pick. My second pick's going to be Central Arkansas. I've said it before on this show. I thought Braylon Smith, from just a pure playmaking talent perspective, was the best quarterback in the Southland Conference last season. And I think he's going to be the best player in the league. I think he's going to be probably your preseason favorite to win the Southland Conference Player of the Year award. And he has some of the best, receivers in the country to throw to at the FCS level. And I mean, we saw their ability to hurt teams in a hurry last year when they played Sam Houston State. Went into half, didn't score a point, down 2 touchdowns, and rally to win that game. I think over 400 yards in that game for Braylon Smith. So I think those are the two teams that are going to be really certain for me. And then I'm going to say a third team will get in, and I'm kind of on the fence with a few of them. Really like Southeastern Louisiana. I think UIW is always going to be at least somewhat of a threat as long as you have Eric Morris there at coach and if John Copeland is healthy at quarterback. But I think the team I'm going to go is my third team to get in the Southland, and depending on how the year goes, maybe they get 4 in. That'd be a wild turn of events. But my third and final team to get in is Nichols, and they lose a lot of pieces. Lose one of the greatest players in Southland history and quarterback Chase Forcade. But the guy they bring in to replace him, Lindsey Scott, we talked about it with former Nichols beat writer Mike Gegenheimer last time we were on the show. But Lindsey Scott, a former, LSU commit, one of the greatest players in Louisiana high school football history out of Zachary High down there just outside of Baton Rouge. And then, went on, transferred to Mizzou, came in, probably going to be a little bit of a learning curve with him being, just in a completely new team. But he was there last year, so it's not like he's like a brand new face to the program. I think once they kind of get that chemistry on the field rolling, they're going to be a dangerous team, kind of down maybe that second half of Southland play.
I'm going to agree with you on the two that I do think would make it, Sam and Central Arkansas. I don't know who necessarily I have picked to win yet. I'm leaning Sam just because they're going to be hosting Central Arkansas, but those are the two for sure. Like the points you've already mentioned, Sam will have, an incredible defense, and I think the offense will do enough to production-wise to make that team really good. And Braylon Smith, quarterback, like you said, probably may end up being the best, or at least candidate for Southland Conference Player of the Year. Luwan Willingham, the wide receiver, he's really, really, really good. I think he will end up being a first-team all-conference wide receiver as well. Like you said, honestly, the thing is there's that definite bottom of the conference, just like I think there's the definite top of the conference. I think HBU will be at the bottom. Northwestern State, I think, will be at the bottom. I still think Lamar Matt will be
for sure
at the bottom. Yeah. And then you're gonna have that middle. Obviously, I think SFA will be better. They can't make the playoffs. I think McNeese will improve. They can't make the playoffs. So I think Southeastern Louisiana will take a little bit of a step back because they lost Lance Guidry, the defense coordinator, went to FAU to be the DB's coach. I think the defense takes a little step back. Chase and Virgil gone. So I'm going to leave it to Incarnate Word and Nichols, like you said. They could get up to 4. I think the national perception of the Southland Conference right now is still kind of like, we need to see you guys do it in the playoffs before we're just gonna give you 4 teams. But yeah, I think
have a lot of guys go undefeated in non-conference play.
Yeah, exactly. So I think Sam and UCA for sure, and then I think Nichols and or Incarnate Word could definitely make noise and earn a playoff bid.
What you got, Matt?
Yeah, so I think David is right that so in the last couple years we've seen, and a lot of coaches have talked about this, just the parity around the conference. But I think this year you definitely have a very well-defined top. To me, there's 3 tiers. There's a very well-defined top. There's the middle of the pack, which I also think there's kind of a top middle and a bottom middle, and then there's the bottom dwellers. So I would basically agree with you guys on the top 2, whatever order you want to put them in with Central and Sam. I think it's two different top 2 teams. Obviously, like you guys mentioned, UCA with the high-powered offense with Braylon Smith, who, Walter Payton Award finalist, just probably player of the year, like you guys said. And then Sam's defense is just elite. I'm still a little wait and see on Sam's offense. Josh, you know more about that than me, but I think I don't see 3, and I definitely don't see 4 this year. The 4 to me is just not going to happen until the national perception changes, and until the Southland stops beating each other up, honestly. But I think the 3rd team, if I had to choose, I would probably go Incarnate Word, just because, Josh, you mentioned John Copeland. If he's healthy, I think he's every bit.
As a freshman a couple years ago.
Right. I think he's every bit as good of quarterback as anybody else in the league, and that's including Braylon Smith, when he's healthy, that is. But could I see a reloaded Nichols team making a run? Would that be a surprise to me? No. So I think those 2 teams, Nichols and Incarnate Word, are going to be competing for that 3rd spot. I definitely don't see 4 getting in. But to me, if I had to go top 3 right now, it would be UCA 1, Sam 2, and Incarnate Word 3. Incarnate Word took a little bit of a step back last year, but I see them getting going again. Southeastern, to me, lost too much, most important of which being Virgil at quarterback. But that's just kind of how I see it. I'll throw Lamar in as one of those bottom dwellers, just to, but
You
listen,
don't think
they
they're
got a
going
new
to be
coach.
back on top right away?
No, listen, you got a new coach. You don't really have a set, number one quarterback right now. You got Miles Wanza as your number one running back, who's talented, but
He's going to be fun to watch, though. He's a guy that I'm really looking forward to seeing.
100%. He's in store for a huge year. Could Lamar win a couple games in conference and get to the middle of the pack potentially? I think 500 in conference for Lamar would be fantastic. But yeah, those top three, those would be my top three: UCA, Sam, and Connor Ward.
I will say, I would have, if they were allowed to participate, I would have said McNeese could have snuck into that like fourth spot, maybe third. Because I think they're gonna upgrade the talent. They weren't bad last year. They really weren't. They were 7-5.
Yeah.
So
with a lot of kind of adversity going on, I mean, I think it's safe to say at this point, looking back on it, that the leader of the program wasn't necessarily all in with me.
Yeah, he had one eye out of the door pretty early, but obviously they can't go, but I do think they could. I'll say this: they will have a say on the Southland Conference playoff picture, even though they can't go.
Oh, absolutely. I think both them and, like I said earlier, SFA, I think those are two really dangerous teams to watch because they were two teams that, working through adversity, whether it was SFA in the first year of a rebuild or McNeese, kind of like we mentioned earlier, those are two teams that were dangerous last year. And I think with everything going on with them, no postseason to play for, I think they're going to be playing to really mess up somebody's season.
So no, you're right. I was just gonna say I agree. It'll be interesting to see how these teams play, but like Matt said, unless there can be a clear top four and those non-conference wins are going to play a big factor. So unless there's a clear top 3 or 4, it's going to be tough. So I do think there's a definite top 2 right now.
Well, just the last thing I have for you guys, Matt. David kind of made some shockwaves go around the conference whenever we made our top Southland Eats picks earlier this year. I went with Nacogdoches. David turned heads going with Beaumont. Matt, you live in Beaumont. You cover Lamar. First give us your top Southland Eats pick in the conference and then tell us why David is either right or wrong with his choice.
Well, listen, I didn't know that Beaumont food was such a controversial topic, first off. But David would know just as well as I would about Beaumont food, honestly. He's a little bit more of a veteran when it comes to Beaumont, honestly. But, I think Beaumont is right there with anybody. And I think, David, I would say Lake Charles is right there with anybody, too. Would you agree?
For sure. Like, okay, so the thing that we agreed upon when we were talking about it was we're leaving the biggest cities out. So like you can't put a Houston, you can't put New Orleans, and I think San Antonio. Those are just not playing by the same rules. So there's, to me, like if you're gonna go places, you got to go to Floyd's. Everybody knows about Floyd's seafood right there off the highway. The burger place, Daddy-O's, I love it. Like I love it. I went there after Lamar played McNeese in football last season. There's a lot of good places. I mean, if you like Tia Juanita's, there's one in Lake Charles. There's one in Beaumont. It's a fusion kind of Mexican, I guess. But nah, man. Like I got stick from people in Natchitoches and everything, but Beaumont is just big enough to where it can incorporate like the Cajun culture and also some of the Texas culture, because that's obviously where it is, and the Creole food and everything like that, and some decent Mexican spots. So yeah, I got stick from it, but I stand by it because you gotta go. I guarantee you, if just Floyd's by itself would have people coming back to me like, David, I apologize.
Right. And that was going to be what I said, is Floyd's is so elite that, you know, you have to at least give it some consideration. But where did we go last time, David? You were in Beaumont. Did we go to Tijuanitas?
We went to Tijuanitas. There's a couple
Yeah.
places that was closed, I think. That was what the problem was.
Daddy-O's was closed, I think.
Yeah, it was because we got out of the game. Yeah, we got out of the game late. I'm trying to think of where. And then for me personally, like there's just things. So like Lake Charles, still does not have a Whataburger, right? So just by
Y'all have Torchy's though now, right?
Almost, it's coming. Listen,
time.
I'm gonna be like I know Torchy's is not traditional, you know, Mexican fare, but it does what it does well. I will be there on the first night. I might have a tuxedo. I tweeted that out. I might rent one. That's a very big deal for me. But you know, it's one of those. Beaumont to me, I feel like the people reacting to what I said about the food might be reacting to the city as a whole, not just the food. You know, because Beaumont is it can kind of go either way depending on how you feel.
In Beaumont, we've talked about this, and you mentioned it, how Beaumont's kind of a bigger city, but not too big. And I've had just a really good, diverse array of things. I mean, I've had probably some of the best crawfish I've ever had in my life, you know, at a random, you know, shack that sells chicken fingers off, you know, a road in Beaumont. And like y'all mentioned, Floyd's is probably, if we're going to rank, like if we're going to do a Mount Rushmore of Southland Conference restaurants, I don't think there's anyone that's been to Floyd's that's leaving that off.
No, you got to go with Floyd's.
We just lost Matt.
Yeah, I was gonna say, but
yeah, Floyd's is on point for sure.
Nah, it definitely is. But you know, I mean, look, every city has their good stuff. We're not gonna. Saying one city's good doesn't mean that another city's awful. Like, just to let everybody know, we're not saying that. We're just, you know, it was just my opinion. Look, plenty of people don't like my opinion, so it won't be the first time. But nah, Beaumont, you know, give it its love.
Well, that's all we got for you today. I'm Josh Criswell. He's David Berry, and our special guest was Matt Faye. Let us know what you think on Twitter, and make sure to watch, you know, previous episodes on the Southland Shenanigans YouTube page.